Good evening. Welcome to the Dixie Vodka SEC Country Preview Show. I'm Matt Stewart, joined by our Florida State National Championship offensive lineman, Forrest Conley. We got a lot of things to cover this evening. Big games with LSU playing at Florida. Bama's going to be at Texas A&M. We're going to preview all that and all the games in the Southeastern Conference. Everything conference games, no non-conference games this week. Plus, we're going to take your posts, your questions, and your comments. We welcome you to send those to us starting right now. But we begin the show in our opening kickoff with big news breaking this evening. The nation's #1 overall college football prospect, Justin Fields, #1 rated dual threat quarterback in the nation out of Harrison High School in Atlanta, has announced that he will make his commitment decision public tomorrow, 10:45 a.m. at a pep rally at his school.
Well, this is an interesting decision because when you look at where you think he would go because of his heart, it would be the University of Georgia. His sister just signed on full scholarship to play at the University of Georgia. I think it's soccer? Softball. And you've got Fields here from the Atlanta area and Georgia right down the street. But I think FSU is the team that stands out and that can probably be the team that gets him from Georgia because you've got a quarterback situation down there that is very unstable. And when you think about Jimbo Fisher, he's the quarterback whisperer. 3 first-round quarterbacks in 5 years. So if it's a business decision, I think it's Florida State.
Well, the 4 schools that are supposedly among his finalists when he makes his announcement again tomorrow morning at 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time, it's Georgia, it's Florida State, it's Auburn, and it's LSU. LSU would be an interesting scenario simply because of the uncertainty of their future quarterback situation, although they have been playing the freshman Miles Brennan a little bit this year.
Well, the question with LSU to me is Coach O going to be there?
Yeah.
We know the one thing that he does extremely well, and I'm not saying he's not a great coach. I think he's a very good coach. I don't put him in that great echelon, but he recruits very well, so that makes LSU an intriguing option for Justin Fields. Auburn, we know Stidham is there. We know the type of offense that Gus Malzahn runs, a dual threat type of offense, something that Fields does very well. So all of these teams are very intriguing. I think every team has their reasons for him to be there. It'll be interesting to see what the decision is and why the decision is.
Well, the recruiting experts always say follow the visits. Where the kid has been visiting is the place you want to focus your attention on. Last week, he visited Alabama, although Alabama supposedly not among his 4 finalists. The 2 weeks prior to that, he was at the University of Georgia. Now, maybe some of that has to do with the fact that it's the closest school to where he lives, but he was at the University of Georgia the 2 visits prior to that. And then before that, he started the season with a visit to LSU that really surprised everybody. And remember, he was originally committed to Penn State until decommitting in June. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. His dad says not going to be a huge ceremony, just going to be on the football field, a table, 4 baseball caps, and he'll pick up the one he's going to.
Well, I take Georgia and Penn State out the equation. McSorley at Penn State from at Georgia. I don't know if those are the teams that he goes to. It'll be interesting. Like I said, of course I want him to go to Florida State. I'm going to put that out there. But at the end of the day, I hope he's happy with the decision that he makes. And I like that he's making it now. Get all of that out the way. Enjoy your high school years. Enjoy the time there. Don't worry about where you've got to go. Don't have recruiters hounding you. So I like the fact that he's announcing now and getting that over with and moving on.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. They're just tired of the recruiting process and, just being hounded with this thing being the #1 prospect in the country. And again, here on SEC Country, we will be covering this story. We'll cover the heck out of it, and we'll be all on top of it tomorrow as soon as he makes that announcement. As he's making his announcement, 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time, #1 prospect in the country, Harrison quarterback Justin Fields, 5-star, #1 dual threat quarterback in the country. That's consensus. All the recruiting services on top of this one with him. He's making his announcement tomorrow, and we'll have that story for you all day, during, and post. We'll have complete coverage. All right, let's get to the rest of our opening kickoff here. And I'm going to spend most of the rest of our opening kickoff here on the hot spots in the SEC, and that's LSU and Tennessee. What the heck is going on at LSU? And, of course, LSU's got a big game with Florida this weekend, and the SEC Network's Chris Doering's going to join us to talk about that. But the Baton Rouge, LSU, the whole Tiger Nation, if you will, in an uproar after Troy ran over them on Saturday. It was a 24-21 3-1 game. But Troy really took him to the woodshed in that game.
Well, Jordan Chunn, the guy we talked about last week, the running back for Troy, stood out in this ball game, 191 yards on 30 carries. And when you invite a team in to play them for homecoming, that's the most disrespectful thing that you can do. Troy is one of the top Group 5 teams, and anytime a Group 5 has an opportunity to go to a Power 5 and show them that they're not as tough as they think they are, they do it, and you saw what happened this past weekend with Troy.
And a lot of the criticism of the Tigers has been that they were not physical enough in that game. They looked disinterested in that game. Joe Oliva, the AD, met with Coach Orgeron this week and the coordinators, all highly unusual things to be meeting in the middle of the week. And we'll come back and hit that story a little bit later on with Chris Doering in our fourth quarter of today's show. The other hot spot I want to hit before we start previewing games, Tennessee, of course, they're off this week after getting drilled by Georgia 41-0. According to the odds makers, Butch Jones is the favorite, if you want to call it that, to be the first SEC coach to be fired this season. The ball's off this week. Is there anything that Tennessee can do the rest of the season to save Butch Jones from being fired?
Well, I think if they went out, they salvaged their football season, but I don't think they can salvage Coach Jones's job. It's one thing to lose to to lose to Georgia, but to lose the way that they did at home, 41-0, there was no fight from this ball club. And when you talk about expectations, there were a lot of expectations for this volunteer ball club, not only to win the SEC East, but to compete for an SEC title with Alabama and compete for a national title. Those were the conversations that were floating around in the preseason. And to have the loss, the way that they lost that ball game and the way that they look right now, I don't think it's anything that you can do to save Coach Jones's job.
One last thing real quick on the Tennessee story, and then we're going to get into our first quarter here. I want to hit this. Albert Haynesworth, who's not been bashful about making his feelings known about Butch Jones and his alma mater, went out and tweeted this week. He says, T. Martin, former teammate, now the OC at Southern Cal, should be the next Volunteers head coach. Number one, do you agree with Al going public with his rants? And number two, do you agree that T would be a good coach for Tennessee?
Well, at the end of the day, Al was one of the top players at the University of Tennessee and at a time one of the top players in the NFL. So he has the right to voice his opinion. And I understand, Al, you're frustrated. You want to see your team do better. I like the idea of T. Martin being the coach there. You've got to remember, T. Martin was a Nike quarterbacks coach, so he has a lot of relationships with high school coaches. He's the offensive coordinator right now at USC. He's running a very good offense, a high potent offense with what many people say may be the first overall pick in Darnold. So when you look at T. Martin, you look at his pedigree, the thing about T. Martin, he did something that Peyton Manning couldn't do at Tennessee. He won a national championship. So he's very well liked and very well admired. And I like the idea of throwing a young guy like T. Martin, a guy that can relate to some of these young players and some of the millennial kids that we see now being recruited, as opposed to some of these older coaches.
All right, let's get to our first quarter, and you're watching the Dixie Vodka SEC Country Preview Show with me, Matt Stewart, and also Forrest Conley here. Dixie Vodka, the South's best tasting, is available only in the South and made by Southerners for Southerners. Going to start the SEC preview section in this first quarter with the number 5 Georgia Bulldogs playing at Vanderbilt. Booger McFarland, SEC Network, ESPN said, man, Georgia looks a lot like Alabama. They look like a national championship contender to me. Do you agree with Booger?
Absolutely do. Georgia has the ability to do what Alabama does to teams, overwhelm you. When you look at this ball club, they step up to the plate. They're not afraid. Now, the difference is they go from being the hunter to the hunted. When you're in the top 5, everybody's aiming for you. So they need to be prepared. They need to go out and play like a top 5 team like they've played so far this season. But I do think that they can win a national championship, compete for one, because of the defense and because of their offense shaped around the running game. They pass off of the running game. When you've got running backs, you've got offensive linemen, you've got defensive linemen like Georgia has, you're always going to be in the conversation.
All right, Bob Stoops actually visited the Georgia practice this week and told the team the wind blows harder at the top. Obviously a reference to don't get overconfident, don't start thinking all that about yourself. And with the number 5 national ranking now and a 5-0 record, is Georgia in danger of a letdown as they go and play Vandy this week? And is it for that reason, and maybe just that reason alone, that the Vandy game's scary for Georgia?
I don't think it's scary for Georgia. I think Georgia understands. You've got to remember, you've got Kirby Smart there. Kirby Smart has been on the Alabama staff for many, many years. He's played and coached in many of these type games where teams that are outside of that realm of Alabama would go in and be a little bit overconfident and may get smacked in the mouth a little bit. I think this Georgia ball club is not going to be overconfident. I think they understand that Vandy is a very tough ball club, a team that you can lose to if you're not careful. Shermer is a very, very good quarterback when he gets time. Georgia has to continue to apply pressure, not allow him to get off and do the things that he likes to do, and be comfortable behind his line of scrimmage. If they can play like they played in this Tennessee ball game early in this Vandy game, I think they can knock it out of them early.
Well, Kirby Smart, speaking of quarterbacks, has refused to reveal whether Jake Fromm will remain the starting quarterback or Jacob Eason, who got in there late at Tennessee, will resume the starting quarterback responsibilities. How do you think this quarterback situation will play out for Georgia on Saturday at Vanderbilt? And do you think we'll see both quarterbacks either way?
I think Fromm starts the game because he's played so well. He's the incumbent starter right now. I think Eason will get some playing time if he's healthy enough. That's the big thing with Eason. If he's not 100% healthy, I don't put him back on the field. I want to make sure my guy's 100% healthy. This is a ball game where you should not need Eason, but you want to give him live action. You cannot duplicate live action in practice, and that's something that he's missed being out the last couple of weeks. So if you get an opportunity to play Eason, you definitely do, but I think Fromm starts, and I do think you see both of them.
What's interesting is we've had some back and forth here because you know, Kirby Smart has not announced his decision. I don't know why he would. There's no benefit to Georgia to go out and say who your number one quarterback is going to be. As long as your quarterbacks know what the situation is going to be, I think that's smart. Derek Mason said, look, Smart isn't fooling me about this quarterback mystery here. Really doesn't make a difference to the Commodores who starts at quarterback for Georgia since Fromm and Eason are a whole lot alike.
Well, it really doesn't matter who starts at quarterback when you've got Nick Chubb in the backfield. Nick Chubb is going to lead your team. The team has to game plan for Nick Chubb. And in game planning for Nick Chubb, that means you add extra players to the box. That means you get man coverage on the outside. And when you've got elite talent on the outside, on the edges like Georgia has at the receiver position, whoever plays quarterback, if you throw it in the area, they've got guys that can go and get it. So I don't think it matters who starts at quarterback as long as Nick Chubb is in the backfield.
Well, for 3 games, Vandy was leading the nation in scoring, defense, and total defense. Last 2 games, they've given up 97 points total to Bama and Florida. Do you think Georgia lights them up like the last 2 opponents have done?
I don't think Georgia goes in looking for 50 points. I don't think they go in looking for revenge. I think Georgia goes in to win the ball game and try and get better and look at the meat and potatoes of the conference coming up. They've got some tough ball games ahead that they need to prepare themselves for. A Georgia Tech team that's waiting in the bushes, a Florida team that's always a tough out for Georgia. This is a game that they want to go in, they want to get the win, they want to get out healthy. They're not looking at scoring 100 points in this ball game. It's about W's right now. That's all they want is W's. They're not concerned with the points and the point spread and, you know, satisfying the fan base that want to see a whole bunch of points put on the board.
Well, you know, we talked about what Booger McFarland said about the Georgia Bulldogs, how they look a lot like Bama with that defense. And I think that's the equation right there. It's not, and we spent a lot of time talking about Fromm and Eason and Nick Chubb, and rightfully so. But the thing to me that makes Georgia a contender and maybe a challenger to Alabama in the SEC championship game is their defense. And they've slammed the door on the last 2 opponents. Mississippi State and Tennessee scored a total of 3 points. Combined in those 2 games, Georgia held the 2 teams to a total of 183 yards passing, 0 touchdowns, picked off 4 passes. They shut down Nick Fitzgerald, the quarterback of Mississippi State, shut down Quentin Dormady, the quarterback of Tennessee. And now they face Shermer, who, you know, got off to a great start this year. Is Vandy's only chance for them to be able to get Shermer loose and be able to throw the ball like he was doing early in the season?
Shermer's a very good quarterback. I think he's better than Fitzgerald. I think he's better than Dormady. But for Shermer to have the type of monster game that he would need for them to beat Georgia, I don't think it happens. I think he plays better than those other 2 guys because of his ability to read defenses. I think Shermer will have a decent game. But as far as Shermer going out and having this monster game and that being the reason that they beat the University of Georgia, I'm sorry, people. I don't see it happening. If Georgia loses this ball game, it's because Georgia beat themselves.
All right, let's move along from the Georgia and Tennessee game here, Georgia and Vanderbilt game, pardon me. Let's move along to Arkansas and South Carolina real quick. That's a 4 o'clock Eastern start on SEC Network. Gamecocks, of course, had early momentum this season. That seems like all that's gone. Arkansas is actually favored in this game at Williams-Brice Stadium. You know, last week Carolina gave up 7 sacks, 12 tackles for loss in their loss at Texas A&M. But the Razorbacks also gave up 344 yards passing to New Mexico State. Can the Gamecocks protect quarterback Jake Bentley long enough for him to sling it all over the field against Arkansas? And if they do, will he be able to?
I think they will. When you give up 7 sacks, you give up 12 tackles for loss, it's very embarrassing. As an offensive lineman, we pride ourselves on our quarterback being clean when the game starts and clean when the game ends. And when your quarterback has been sacked 7 times and you've given up 12 tackles for loss, you've not done your job. The worst thing a quarterback sees is the front of his offensive lineman's jerseys, because that means they're looking back to see where the defensive lineman is that beat them, that's chasing him for his life. So I think they'll play better. I don't know if they win this ball game. This is a toss-up, but they will play better because pride will step into place.
And again, stick around into the show in our 2-minute drill. We'll be making our predictions. Both of us went 5-1 last week. We're going to predict with the scores this week, so we're up in the ante a little bit. We'll be making our predictions with scores as well coming up in our 2-minute drill at the end of the show. And stick around also, SEC Network's Chris Doering, good friend of mine and former Florida Gator himself, a legend. He's going to join us coming up in the 4th quarter, and we're going to preview the LSU and the Florida game in that 4th quarter. Let's move along to the 2nd quarter. Again, you're watching the Dixie Vodka SEC Country preview. It's game day. Swing on by any of your favorite beverage stops and pick up some Dixie Vodka for your favorite game time drink. Dixie Vodka, the South's best tasting vodka. I'm Matt Stewart, joined by Forrest Conley. 2nd quarter, number 1 Alabama, Texas A&M, 7:15 kickoff on ESPN. You know, last 2 weeks we've seen Crimson Tide just blow out Vandy. They blow out Ole Miss. Nobody's saying it. Seems to me like Bama's been settling some old scores here. You know, Vandy was talking a little bit before that game. They kick them 59-0. Ole Miss, that had been a wild game the previous 3 seasons. They get a little revenge on them, 66-3. Now Bama goes to A&M. Ever since Johnny Manziel broke into the league and beat Alabama, Tide have won 4 straight. Is this another perhaps score-settling game for Bama?
This is an interesting ball game. I've played against Texas A&M in Texas. Very difficult to beat this team at College Station because of the crowd noise, the fan interaction. This will be a very hostile environment. I think this will be the first true hostile environment that Alabama's played in this season. Now, does that affect their play? I don't think it affects their play as it would another team. But I think it does give cause for concern for this Alabama offense. When you're an offensive lineman and you got to hear the snap count, this can affect the snap count. This can affect the timing of the lineman, the timing of the receivers getting off the line of scrimmage if they can't hear the snap and they're looking straight ahead. So when you look at this ball game, it sets up for an interesting ball game. But I do think Bama goes in and does what Bama does, and that's play very well. Now, Texas A&M has a chance. Every team has a chance when you're playing a college football game, but they have to play the perfect ball game to win this game.
Well, Bama's had back-to-back 50-plus point scoring games. First time that's happened since 1945. 2 huge beatdowns of SEC opponents. And this isn't the usual Nick Saban way. We haven't seen a lot of these type beatdowns going on. So what's going on? Is this a new Bama formula here?
This is Steve Sarkisian. This is the Sarkisian effect. You've got an offensive coordinator that was known for pitching and catching the football at the University of Washington. He was known for pitching and catching the football when he was a coordinator at USC and when he was a head coach at USC. Sarkisian wants to get back to being a head coach, and he's surrounded by a bevy of talent, more talent than he's probably ever had combined with his USC and Washington teams at the University of Alabama. So he's taking advantage of it. Now, we don't see gaudy numbers like 300-400 yards passing, but you see 200 yards rushing, 200 yards passing, 300 yards rushing, 200 yards passing. A type of offense that you don't know where to start to try and stop this offense because it's so multitude. He has multiple ways of using his talent, and I think that's what you're seeing more of with this Alabama ball club this season and seasons in the past.
Well, what's interesting is Saban has called Texas A&M the best opponent that they've played, all season long, and that includes Florida State, who they beat in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium to start the season. Do you think that's just coach speak, or are the Aggies actually? And let's face it, the Aggies are 4-1, and they are 2-0 in the SEC. They still have that cloud of the collapse against UCLA hanging over them, but realistically they should be 5-0 in the season.
Well, they've had some ugly wins this season. I think if Florida State is healthy, they're the better ball club. But you got to remember, in the offseason, Jimbo Fisher made it clear that he thought the ACC was the elite college football conference. And this is war games within the mindset of these coaches. When you look at what Nick Saban is saying, he's saying the SEC is still the top dog as far as college football. And every chance I get, I'm going to, talk about the teams within the SEC and how tough they are as opposed to the ACC.
Well, Kellen Mond passed for 159 yards, ran for close to 100 in the victory against South Carolina last week. What kind of success will he have against that Bama defense?
Not as much. They're going to hit him in the mouth. He's going to play against the toughest defense he'll probably ever see in his college career when you face this Alabama ball club. And he's just got to stay patient. He's got to stay steady. Take what they give you. Even if it's a 2-yard pass, you take it. You want positive yards. Then you try to get into that zone and that rhythm that you've gotten into with these 4 wins. But if you go out there and try and be a hero early in this ball game, you might not make it out.
On offense, quarterback Jalen Hurts playing at a very high level, passing the ball, running the ball. There isn't a Heisman candidate in the SEC, at least as far as what the experts are saying. ESPN put out a list. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. He's playing at a high level, but no SEC player. I think that if there's anybody in the SEC who is a Heisman candidate, it is this guy. What have you seen from Hurts this season?
What I've seen from him over his career is one loss. I've seen a guy that leads his team. I've seen a guy where the running backs weren't running well and the receivers weren't catching the ball, take it upon himself to rush the football as if he were the starting tailback for this ball club. I've seen a guy make big plays. I've seen an 18-year-old play out of his mind and play and become the SEC Player of the Year and SEC Rookie of the Year. I see a guy that's being overlooked because he plays on a great team for the Heisman Trophy. And I see a guy that if he continues to play well, if they continue to win, he has to be a part of that conversation.
And Calvin Ridley has been by far and away their top receiver. 24 catches for Calvin Ridley so far this season. But that's by far and away more than anybody else. So they got to get more diversity from the standpoint of getting the ball to more people in their passing game.
Well, when you think about Alabama passing, outside of Julio Jones and Amari Cooper, who were the guys that got 60 or 70 passes a season? Those were special talents. I don't think Ridley's in that category. When you're talking about Alabama, they're an old school square chin, buckle up their chin strap, we're going to run it down your throat football team. That's why they have a bevy of tailbacks. That's why they bring it to you every single game. Their offensive linemen are programmed to run, block, and road grade, and their running backs are programmed to run over you if you get in their way. So I'm not putting too much into not having a diversified pass game. I think they'll be okay. You want to get the ball to some of your other talent. You had O.J. Howard last year, one of the best tight ends in the country. I think he got 25, 30 passes. So when you think about the production of their receivers, it's not that big of a deal that they're not spreading the ball around. If they do double up Ridley, you've got to find someone else to get the football to, but I think Alabama throws it to the back out of the backfield. That's their bread and butter, getting it to the backs.
Defensive lineman Deshaun Hand out of this ball game has a sprained MCL. What kind of impact do you think that'll have on the Bama defense?
None whatsoever. You've got 5 stars. They've got 6 stars, some we never heard of. 7, 8, 9 stars. They've got stars all over the field. They've got guys ready to play. I think you see a new guy come to the fold, introduce himself to the world, and a guy that everyone knows we're going to have to look out from Bama for the next 2 to 3 years. I don't think it hurts them at all. I think it helps them because it gives real game and real live experience to a young guy that may not have gotten it this far this season.
All right, let's move along here to our halftime show. In our halftime show, going to get to some of your comments. And also ESPN experts, as I was saying, in their Heisman watch this week, out of the 8 players they listed as the top candidates, there's not one SEC player listed among those top 8 candidates. And I think Jalen Hurts, if anybody is, and if it's not Jalen Hurts, perhaps Nick Chubb. But is it interesting to you that there are no Heisman candidates, at least none that have stepped forward and cracked the top 8 of this ESPN experts poll?
I agree that Jalen Hurts should be a top candidate for the Heisman Trophy. I think it hurts because he plays for the University of Alabama, and there's so many great players, and the expectation is for them to be number 1 or right around number 1 every season, all season long. But when you look at Hurts versus Chubb, the difference is Hurts touches the ball every single play, so he dictates where the ball goes. Chubb only touches the ball when the ball is handed off to him or it's thrown to him out of the backfield. I think that is what puts Hurts in the driver's seat as far as being a candidate for the Heisman Trophy. Now, if both of these teams go undefeated and get to the SEC championship game as undefeated ball clubs, then they both need to be in the conversation, because we know that Georgia will have gotten there with a true freshman quarterback and Nick Chubb, and Jalen Hurts will have been the leader of this Alabama ball club to get back to the SEC championship game.
Well, Jalen Hurts, I think he's probably hurt a little bit by the fact that, Alabama does not have to depend on him. And, statistically, like maybe some of the other quarterbacks, doesn't have the big numbers. But I would argue that by saying, look what he does not only with his arm, but also with his legs. It's as a dual threat quarterback. He just doesn't have the gaudy statistics that maybe some of these other candidates have. But I think he's just as much valuable, if not more so.
But my problem with that is A.J. McCarron. McCarron didn't throw for 300-400 yards a game.
Yeah, but McCarron didn't run. Yeah, McCarron didn't run.
But he didn't run the ball like Hurts does. So when you look at the yards that McCarron passed for versus the yards that Hurts passes for and runs for, McCarron was right behind Jameis Winston for the Heisman Trophy when you looked at that voting. And so I look at Jalen Hurts as a guy that's just being overlooked because people have gotten used to Bama being so good. I think that is the problem. He's on a team that's been so good for so long, and not just good, dominant for so long. And people tend to think about the last bad game. When you look at that national championship game, here's a guy that had 2 offensive coordinators in 1 week. He had 1 week to prepare for a ball game. You cannot put that on an 18-year-old and expect him to be successful. But this guy also only has 1 loss. And I think people need to start looking at that. It's a load to carry on the tradition of winning the way he's done it so far at Alabama.
All right, let's get to some of your comments here. Chris Leonard posts the AD, speaking about the LSU situation. The AD can have a meeting with whoever he wants, and if it puts the program on the right track, then he made the right decision. I certainly would agree with him on that. I just think it's very strange to have a sit-down meeting with your head coach and you bring in the offensive coordinator, Matt Canada, and the defensive coordinator, Dave Aranda, and you do that on a game week when you're going to be playing a big game at Florida. I just find the timing very peculiar. I think it sends up a lot of red flags about, exactly what is going on at LSU.
Ice bags. That's what's going on at LSU. The seat is hot, and they've got ice bags, and they better sit on them and try and cool off. Because if they don't win this game at Florida, trouble will be brewing in Baton Rouge. I think it's trouble in the air. I think the clouds are dark right now, and they're wondering if they're going to keep their jobs. As you said, Matt, the AD doesn't meet with you midweek before another big game to discuss, pleasantries. They're discussing the fact that a lot of people are very unhappy. So I call this ice bags.
All right, Lashad Hall he says if Georgia goes back to Eason, it will destroy, or the team will lose. I don't think he used the word destroy, but he said the team will lose team chemistry by going back to Eason from Fromm. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely do agree. When you look at what Fromm has done, a win at Notre Dame, a win at Tennessee. Now, he's not going out and putting up these huge numbers, but he's doing everything right. He's not beating the team. he's not helping the team get behind. He's doing exactly what he needs to do, and the team believes in him. You saw that when Eason went down, and they talked to some offensive linemen after the ball game, and they said, we're fine. We feel good about our guy. We're going to continue to move forward. And I think you break something up if you pull him out. And I hate it for Eason because it's not his fault that he got hurt. He was out trying to help his ball club. But it's about wins and losses. And the one thing that Kirby Smart will do is keep the best guy in there that's going to give him the best opportunity to win.
Well, I think we'll see both of the quarterbacks tomorrow, and I think it's a good situation actually for Georgia to be in. I think people are looking at this thing all the wrong way. They're looking at it as a negative. I think it's a positive when you have two quarterbacks that are playing or have the potential to play at a high level and push each other. Now, what ultimately happens with that quarterback decision, who knows? Don't want to go down that road and speculate what might happen there in the long run. But I think in the 2017 season, I think it's nothing but a good thing for Georgia.
You absolutely need to have two quarterbacks that can play and help your ball club win. Everyone knows you're an ankle sprain away from being in the ball game. You look at Florida State, James Blackman, a true freshman, 6'5", 160 pounds playing. You don't want to put a kid that young that is not physically ready to play in, but they had to do what they had to do. When you look at Georgia, they're fine right now. Eason goes down, you bring in Fromm. Now Fromm has to continue to play well. If he doesn't, you know what you have in Eason. So it's a great problem for any coach to have.
All right, let's get to our third quarter now and get back to previewing SEC games. I'm Matt Stewart, joined by Forrest Conley. You are watching the Dixie Vodka SEC Country preview show. There are two things that are not debatable. Dixie Vodka and SEC football are the best in the South. Dixie Vodka, the South's best tasting vodka. Let's turn our attention to Ole Miss, number 12 Auburn. That's a 12 noon Eastern start on SEC Network. Tigers have won back-to-back SEC games by 30-plus points over Mizzou and Mississippi State. Quarterback Jarrett Stidham says the Tigers are gelling at the right time. Do you agree?
They are trending upward. Stidham 26 of 33 the last two ball games. Not a lot of passes, but he has done a great job when he's had the opportunity to pass the football. That's at a clip of 78%. This is what the coaching staff envisioned when Stidham was brought into the program, and they're getting their bang for their buck right now. He has to continue to do this, continue to develop confidence, and it all starts with the offensive line. When you give up 11 sacks in a ball game like they did at Clemson, the quarterback has to be able to trust you, and I think these last couple of games, we thought the Mercer game would be the coming out game for him, but I think in that game he was still looking to try and earn some trust, or the line was trying to earn some trust from their quarterback. I think you see that now. Only 4 sacks since that Clemson ball game. That shows you the line is playing better, albeit they haven't played a defensive line like Clemson, but they're protecting their quarterback better. He's playing with more confidence, and you see the positive effects.
Well, they've made some changes on that offensive line, and you can speak to these a little bit. Auburn moving Austin Golson back to left tackle. Darius James, who's back from his neck injury, now playing right tackle. They've got a graduate transfer, Casey Dunn, who came to the program from Jacksonville State. They've been starting him at center. Does it look like to you the Tigers have found the right combination up front?
Well, they always say if it's not broke, don't fix it. But if it's broke, you got to fix it. And it was broken. And they found a way to fix it. And offensive line coaches do this from time to time. They move guys around to see how they play with one another and how they gel. And I think they've found the right mix of individuals with the movements that they've made since that Clemson ball game.
Well, in related news, they have a healthy running back in Karen Johnson. He's had back-to-back 100-yard games. Is that something that Auburn absolutely has to have, that big running game, Karen Johnson, Cam Petway, whoever, or a combination of both in order for them to be successful?
I think it is, because their passing game is predicated on the production of the running game. When you can run the ball effectively, teams have to pack the box. And with those big backs that Auburn has, you've got to put 8 kids in the box, which means you've got man coverage on the outside. And when you've got man coverage, you're more likely to complete passes down the field. You're able to get on top of defensive backs because you don't have safety help over the top because they're down in the box to try and stop the run. So I think it does help this ball club, and their offense is predicated upon them being successful running the football.
Well, Rebels coach Matt Luke says that the answer for his team is to simplify the game plan on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively. Do you think that's the answer for the Ole Miss problems?
No matter the call, the players have to execute. You can simplify it all you want to, but if the players don't execute, it's not going to get done. So you want to do things and cater your offense to their strengths, but the players have to get the job done.
I think you got to feel bad for Matt Luke. He's in a tough spot right here. We know the NCAA cloud that's hanging over the program. He got thrown into the job, less than a month before the season started. The offense now, after getting off to such a great start against lesser competition, has scored only 3 points in the last 6 quarters. Shea Patterson's been sacked 8 times in the last 2 games. Do you see things going from bad to worse with Ole Miss here as the season goes on?
I think they'll be okay. You've got to think 4 of those quarters were against Alabama, and 5 of those 8 sacks were against Alabama. So you take those out of the equation. They haven't played that bad as far as those numbers are concerned. He does need to get back to spinning the football and, being comfortable back there. But for this ball club, any win to me is a positive with everything that those kids are going through. And you hate this for those kids. They had nothing to do with some of the things that are going on at the University of Mississippi, and you just hope that the school can get through this and the kids won't be as much affected as they've been so far. I don't know how to put this any other way. We always put the kids out there when they do something wrong. And we've talked about it, Matt, on the show with the Florida kids that have done something wrong. They've got to pay the price for it. But in this instance, when a coach does something wrong, the kids are not responsible, but those are the ones that are going to get penalized. Hugh Freeze is gone. He's going to enjoy his money. He's not going to worry about.
But he's not getting any more.
He's not getting any more, but he's got enough. But these kids now are going to deal with penalties that they had nothing to do with. The freshmen that just started there, and to me, this goes back to that whole thing of if a coach gets dismissed because of inappropriate behavior, right, a kid should be able to leave too.
Well, in that case, they'd have a whole lot of players leaving, but that's a subject for another. But I tend to agree with that to a certain extent, but at the same time, if that happened, then you could have a mass exodus. Everybody's gone.
But what it does, it makes the program have much more oversight.
Yeah, you're right. More accountability, no doubt about it, because the consequences could be dire indeed. All right, coming up in a few minutes, we're going to be joined by Chris Doering, going to talk about that Florida and LSU game in depth. Before we close out this third quarter, though, let's hit on that Missouri and Kentucky game. That's a 7:30 Eastern start on SEC Network. And my question is, what the heck do we make of the Wildcats? This is a team that's 4-0. I mean, they were that close to being 5-0 if they don't blow that game against the Florida Gators. They should have won that. At the same time, they've struggled against the Easterns, against Eastern Kentucky, and against Eastern Michigan this past week. So are the 4-1 Wildcats really any good?
Eastern Michigan has gotten better. Eastern Kentucky are a bunch of players that feel like they should have been at either Louisville or the University of Kentucky. I like this Kentucky ball club because it's a bunch of scrappy kids out there. They play really tough football. Brutal loss to Florida. I'm still trying to figure out the defensive configuration on that play where the guy was just left wide open, right at the end zone at the end of the ball game where everybody should be covered up. Brutal loss. But this is a very scrappy team. I like Coach Stoops. I like what he's instilled in these players. They've got confidence, something that you need to have a winning program. And I think that they will get back to playing the type of ball that we saw early in the season where you said, okay, these guys aren't that bad.
All right, let's move along to the fourth quarter. You're watching the Dixie Vodka SEC Country Preview Show. I'm Matt Stewart, joined by Forrest Conley. There are two things that are not debatable, and that's Dixie Vodka and SEC football. They're the best in the South. Dixie Vodka, the South's best tasting vodka. All right, fourth quarter, LSU Tigers, number 21 Florida Gators. This is the 3:30 Eastern Time start on CBS. This game has not traditionally been a big rivalry game. It has become a big rivalry game over the last decade or so just because of the stature and magnitude of the two programs that have played in it. Of course, you throw in what happened last year with the hurricane and the controversy that went with it with Florida and the way they won the game last year. And now I think you've got the makings of a rivalry. Time now to bring in former Florida Gators wide receiver, legend, and SEC Network's Chris Doering, who's driving around in the state of Florida tonight. He's going to join us to preview the game. Chrissy, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing good, buddy. Good to be on with you guys.
Good to hear from you. You know, we know that Bama has kind of separated from the field. Looks like Georgia and Auburn trying to separate from the field as well. Does the winner of this ball game stay in that pack with those three teams, and the loser maybe fall out?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because every Saturday night, if we're wrapping up all the games in the SEC Network studio, me and Dory and Kuzik and our producer, Brad Buchanan, we sit down and we rank the teams in the SEC from 1 to 14. 1 is very easy. 14 is very easy. 2 and 3 now I think are interchangeable. I went with Georgia 2, Auburn number 3. But when you get past that, it becomes a little more cloudy. And I had Florida at 4, A&M at 5. I had LSU actually way down the list. But I believe that Florida has a chance to continue to prove that they're getting better from week to week following that loss to LSU. They seem to have improved, particularly on the offensive line. And I think by winning here with an impressive performance, they certainly keep themselves in good position in the East. And even more importantly, they've started to develop an identity with that offensive line in that running game. And I think that's clearly what this team needs to do if they're going to put themselves in the mix as the season gets on through October.
Well, Chris, the Gators still have a lot of questions on offense. Let's start at QB. Del Rio is out of the picture. Can Felipe Franks develop into a consistent number 1? And if he doesn't, is Malik Zaire an option, even though we haven't seen that yet?
Yeah, I was a big Del Rio fan heading into the season. I thought he should have been the guy to start the year, given the fact that there were so many playmakers on offense that were developing around the quarterback position. The coaching staff chose to go with Felipe Franks from the get-go. They knew there would be some growing pains that they'd have to work through. But I was excited about Del Rio getting that chance against in the end of that Kentucky game, and then last week against Vandy, only to go down a quarter and a half into his comeback. So really, you don't have a whole lot of choice at this point in time. With Franks, you got a guy that's an athlete, a strong arm, can make all the throws, but really is early in his progression as an SEC quarterback. So you're going to see a shrunk down playbook. You're going to see limited reads. Limited progressions, and Florida's going to have to lean heavily on that run game. And I think that's the recipe for success. You have to look no further than what Georgia's doing. They're a team offensively that plays to their strength. Their offensive line has improved, and they run the football with that three-headed monster back there. So I think Florida can continue to develop that identity. If for some reason Franks went down, I think you're in a tough spot. Malik Zaire is a guy that got here late as a transfer from Notre Dame. I don't think he knows the offense as well as what Franks does, even. But a guy that brings you some athletic ability with his legs. So they would have to change up the offense considerably, in my opinion, if they did have to go to that third quarterback.
Well, you mentioned the running game. LaMichael Pirine, emerging freshman Malik Davis had a big game last week. Will the Gators be able to run the ball against LSU?
Yeah, I think they will. I mean, I think you look at the problem. Everybody talks about what the problems that this LSU program are facing are. To me, it's on the lines of scrimmage. And one of my guys, my former partner, Booger McFarland, I think said it best. They've gotten soft on the offensive line and soft on the defensive line. If you look at the statistics from last week in that Troy game, 35 minutes of time of possession, over 200 yards rushing, and converted, I think, 10 of 17 on third down, or it was well over 50%. Those are the statistics that we're typically used to seeing from an LSU offense. Instead, that was Troy against this LSU defense. They're thin, they're young in that front seven. The offensive line is not very good, in my opinion. So I think if we're talking Florida's matchup with their offensive line versus LSU's defense, I believe they can run the football now. I certainly believe that Dave Aranda's going to have a plan put together for Florida's offense. I expect him to have an extra guy down there in the box to help run support and force Felipe Franks to beat you throwing the football. I think that's where you have your best advantage if you're LSU's defense.
Well, you talk about forcing Felipe Franks to throw the football. The passing game took a hit earlier this week with wide receiver Tyree Cleveland, the star of the Tennessee win, going out. How big of a loss is that for the Gators?
Yeah, he's been their deep threat guy, a guy that averages over 20 yards a catch. Obviously had that big touchdown reception against Tennessee. But the one thing heading into the season that most Florida fans felt good about was there were some young guys that were developing that maybe hadn't proven themselves yet, but were showing themselves to be ready to play. And I think it's unfortunate that Tyree, and I'm not even sold he's not going to play yet. I know the word has been that he's out, but I'm not sold that he's a scratch for this game yet. But if he's not there, Dre Massey's a guy that was a junior college transfer before last season, hurt his knee in the opening kickoff of the year, and then ended up getting redshirted. He's a guy that we may see a little bit more of. He can certainly take the top off the defense. Just haven't seen a lot of him to this point. But without Tyree Cleveland, that is one of your weapons that you're definitely missing in this football game.
Let's look at the LSU situation a little bit. You hit on it already. Questions about their physicality in that loss to Troy. Questions about even looking like they were even interested in being out there. And of course, it looked like they had set off a warning there or something because the stadium cleared out by the end of the game. I'd never seen anything like it at an SEC game, I don't think, where the stands were as empty as they were at Death Valley. And then you fast forward to this week, and there was supposedly a players-only meeting, although nobody was really sure who spoke up and what was said. And then Joe Oliva, the AD, meets during the week with head coach Ed Orgeron, offensive coordinator Matt Canada, defensive coordinator Dave Aranda, all just a bunch of really weird stuff going on in the middle of a big game week. What do you make of all that?
Well, I mean, there's been a lot of weird stuff over the last couple of years, and I think it probably starts with Joe Oliva. I mean, the decision 2 years ago to kind of make it seem like they were getting rid of Les Miles, only to come out and give him the endorsement for another year, and that lasted, a couple games into the 2016 season. Looking for a big-name guy, trying to get Tom Herman. That doesn't work out very well. You're not able to get anybody else, so you decide to stay with Coach O. It's just been a weird series of events for a couple years now, and the biggest issue, I think, is the fact that you have a guy in Coach O who hired two of the top assistants in the country, in my opinion. I thought this was the team that maybe had the best tandem of coordinators in the conference for sure, and maybe in the country. And what do? A couple games into the season, you decide to tweak what Matt Canada has become known to do. I mean, the reason that he's such a highly sought-after coordinator, the reason that you brought him in and paid him all the money he did is because he's able to create mismatches. And the way he's done that in the past is with personnel groupings, with shifts, with motions, with different looks. You got to be an intelligent football player to play in this offense. And by Coach O coming in and trying to simplify things, as he said, I think it really affected the way that this offense was able to operate in that first half. Finally, when he got the reins back, they looked like they had some more production in the second half. But if I'm Coach O, I'm letting those guys coach because you have confidence in them enough to pay them all the money you did. Let them do their jobs and keep your hands out of that. Be the rah-rah guy, be the recruiting guy, but let those coordinators handle the bulk of the on-field coaching and game planning.
Well, for the last two games, they've worked freshman Myles Brennan into the offense, but Coach O made the announcement that Danny Etling will play the entire ball game. Do you think that's the right move?
I don't. I think Myles Brennan should have been playing more the last couple weeks, and I made that statement on our show. Danny Etling is a guy that's a fifth-year senior, a guy that transferred from Purdue and was criticized 2 weeks ago by Coach O for not getting the team into the right plays, not making the right checks at the line of scrimmage, not being able to come up make accurate throws in a lot of cases. This is a team that is struggling this year, and if I were looking to make some improvements in the next couple of years, I'm going with Myles Brennan. He's the future of this offense. I know you're going to have some growing pains with him, but it can't be much worse than what you're going through right now with this fifth-year guy that's supposed to know the offense as well as he does. That clearly is making the coach unhappy by not getting the team into the right plays, making the right checks, and making the right throws.
Final question for you, Chris. Darius Geis, Darrell Williams, their two running backs, both of them, Orgeron says, are questionable in this game. Defensive end Rashard Lawrence, who hasn't played a lot, says he's going to play him limited time. How badly will the Tigers miss Geis and Williams in this game if they're unable to go against the Gators?
Well, I mean, that'd be a huge blow to this team. And you've seen the impact of not having a healthy Geis in the last couple of games. He didn't play this past week against Troy, and then the week before that, only had a limited number of snaps, so he's obviously hurting. Getting Darrell Williams, getting Geis back, I mean, that's a huge key for them. They got a couple of linemen supposedly back on the offensive side, returning a defensive starter, so they're slowly getting healthy. And if they want to compete in this football game, getting the bulk of those guys back and ready to go is a huge factor. But I've been warning Gator fans about this all week long. This is a team that's recruited extremely well over the last few years. They're always in the top 5 or top 10 when it comes to recruiting rankings. So they got some athletes, and anytime you got athletes available, you certainly don't want to overlook those guys as a dangerous team as you head into the football game on Saturday.
Hey, Chris, thanks for being with us. Safe travels down there in Florida. We'll be watching you on Saturdays. You pull an all-day and all-nighter there at SEC Network with Coach Chiz and with Dari Noka.
Yeah, great being on with you guys. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Chris Dorian, SEC Network, Florida Gators legendary wide receiver, and you can see him on Saturdays, SEC Network, all day in studio breaking down the SEC games. All right, time now to get to our 2-minute drill here. You're watching the Dixie Vodka SEC Country preview show. Every season there is something new in the SEC. This season it's Dixie Vodka to make your tailgate perfect. Swing by and get you some. Dixie Vodka, the South's best tasting vodka. Going to see if we can squeeze in a few more comments and questions for you before we close out the show. But again, to go back and revisit the top story of the hour that we began the show with back at 7:30 Eastern Time, and that is the announcement. And some of you have, I've seen you post on there asking what the decision is with Justin Fields. And the story with Justin Fields is this. 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time tomorrow at his high school, Harrison High School in Atlanta. The #1 overall prospect in the country is going to announce his decision. And it looks like it's coming down to, if the experts are right, it's a 4-team group. It's Georgia, it's Florida State. I know Forrest, Florida State Seminole over here, he's hoping it's Florida State. And I know your Georgia fans are hoping it's the Bulldogs. LSU fans, Auburn fans, you're hoping it's your set of Tigers. But that's the story. Tomorrow, 10:45, and it's really kind of stunning because it came out of nowhere. Justin Fields had given no indication. You know, a lot of times kids will announce, hey, you know, on this date I'm going to do it. This just kind of broke this evening, and suddenly we've got a decision from him, which is kind of surprising because it's still just early October.
Well, it's full of intrigue because we named the reasons for every school. There's a reason for him to go to every single school on that list, those 4 schools. So that makes it a very intriguing decision.
Well, we'll see. His dad says it's just going to be a very simple thing. Going to sit there at a table there at the football field. He's going to have 4 baseball caps in front of him, and his son's going to pick up the cap to the place where he's going to go. And, you know, having, done a lot of recruiting shows over the last 4 or 5 years, I know the recruiting experts, of which I'm not one, but what they say kind of rubs off on me, so that's where I get my knowledge. What the recruiting experts always say is follow the visits. Where a kid visits, that's where you're going to find the likely decision. And so from the Justin Fields perspective, remember a kid who was originally committed to Penn State until June and then decommitted from the Nittany Lions and reopened his recruitment over the last month. This is where he's been. Last week he was at the Alabama game. The 2 weeks prior to that he was at the Georgia football games, and the week prior to that, going back 4 weeks, was the big surprise is when he went to LSU. So he's been to Georgia more than any other place over the last month. He's probably been around the Georgia program, more than any other program since he decommitted from Penn State. The logic would say it'll be the Georgia Bulldogs. That just seems like, for a lot of people, kind of a curious decision if indeed that is it, because of the situation Georgia currently has at quarterback, with 2 young guys really just basically starting their college careers at Georgia in Fromm and Eason.
That's why I eliminate Georgia, because of those young guys, and they're being very successful. I think Florida State, Blackman, we don't know yet. He's a smaller kid. He's got a long way to go. Auburn is very intriguing because of the offense that they run, and I think Gus Malzahn can take him and mold him into a Cam Newton type with his ability to throw the football and run the football. In LSU, we know they've needed a quarterback for the last 25 years. But when you lose the way that LSU lost to Troy, I wonder if that is an eliminator for them.
All right, well, so we'll find out. That's 10:45 Eastern tomorrow. SEC Country will be all over this story, as it's happening, live and post. We'll have analysis of his decision, and certainly a lot of people will have some interesting things to say after Justin Fields tells us his decision. I think it's very intriguing that on a Friday, bam, and they don't play tomorrow. Harrison's got a week off, so they're taking a bye week here, and he's going to go ahead and get it out of the way. And I think the other question is, if he does indeed follows through and announces tomorrow, is this one going to stick? Because his previous one didn't. Penn State, he didn't stick with Penn State. So we'll see, because there's still a long way until February. All right, before we close out our Dixie Vodka SEC Country preview show, let's get to our predictions for the week. And again, you and I went 5-1 last week. I think we were right on top of everything. We didn't differ on anything. We've got one game we differ on this week. Let's start with Ole Miss and Auburn. And I'm going to go Tigers in a big way here. I don't have any confidence whatsoever in the. Is that the one we're going with first, Ole Miss and Auburn, or do I have it out of order here? Maybe if I looked at my rundown, I would get it right. Well, there it goes. There goes the rundown. Fortunately, folks, I've got another one right here. So.
You got Butterfingers over.
I do. Butterfinger. Okay, no, Missouri and Kentucky. We're starting with Missouri and Kentucky. Missouri and Kentucky. You go ahead. You tell us who wins.
I've got Kentucky winning this ball game 31-3. I like the scrappiness of this Kentucky ball club, and I just think Coach Odom has lost this Missouri ball club right now. I don't think they play for him.
Well, I agree with you on that. I like Kentucky in this one, 31-13, so a touchdown and a couple of field goals for this Missouri team that, I think there's going to be a job opening there. And Kentucky's going to be 5-1 at the end of this day, and they'll be one victory away from being bowl eligible. So.
And my question is, does that make Stoops a hot candidate for a bigger job?
They got to win some big games. They got to win some big games. You got to knock off some teams, and being 5-1 is nice, especially for Kentucky. They're going to have to win some big games. They missed a great opportunity against the Florida Gators a couple of weeks ago. They got to win some big games. Got to knock some people off for Stoops to be a candidate, I think, for another job. All right, now we're going to go to the Ole Miss Auburn game. Finally, I've got no confidence whatsoever in this Rebels defense, and I think the Tigers are really starting to, as Jarrett Stidham said, starting to gel. I got the Tigers in a big way in this one. I'm going Tigers 49-14.
The Tigers are trending upward, and I go with them as well, 34-14.
So we're both on board with the Auburn Tigers, a big number there on the Ole Miss Rebels. Let's go Georgia and Vanderbilt. I think we talked about this game earlier. Is there a potential there for Georgia to maybe relax a little bit after having a big win against Tennessee last week? And, of course, let's not forget this is a Vandy team that came in and beat Georgia last year in Athens 17-16. But I think we're all in agreement this is not the same Bulldogs team that was playing last year at this time. I'm going Georgia 35-10.
I agree. I think the University of Georgia will handle their business. I think it'll be a 31-7 ball game. Easy win for this Georgia ball club.
I think as far as intriguing games go, as far as closeness of actual game, I think the Arkansas-South Carolina game certainly fits into that one. Now, as far as marquee value, maybe not so much. These are two teams that are in the middle to bottom of the SEC in my mind. But I think it's going to be a really good game. I think it's going to be a back-and-forth game. I think it's going to go down to maybe the last one or two possessions. And despite the fact that Arkansas, according to Las Vegas, is the favorite here, I'm going with the Gamecocks 30-24.
I'm going with the Gamecocks as well, 34-31 in this ball game.
34-31, 30-24, pretty close on that one. This is the game that you and I disagree on. This is the LSU-Florida game. I think it's the marquee game of the week, and thanks to Chris Dorian again for joining us to talk about it. This Florida team just continues to confound me with all the suspensions, Antonio Callaway and Jordan Scarlett. This team has no business playing or winning as they are doing. I was getting ready to say play well. I don't know they've really played well. They've just found ways to win. They upset Tennessee with the Hail Mary and all that kind of stuff. But as much as Florida confounds me, LSU confounds me even more. I'm going to go Gators 26-24.
Embarrassment makes you play well. Meetings with the higher-ups makes you play well. I think that LSU surprises everyone and wins this game 20-3.
Well, I mean, you're right. If embarrassment makes you play well, then LSU's got a great opportunity to play well here, and that's nothing against Troy. But I'm going Florida Gators in this one. We'll wait and see next Thursday. We'll find out who ends up when we review our tote board here. And the last game we're going to hit on the board is the Alabama at Texas A&M. Texas A&M's another team there. I mean, they're 4-1. They're 2-1. That kind of disguises things a little bit. I don't know that they're quite as good as their record makes them seem. In fact, I like Alabama in a big way. Crimson Tide just putting big numbers on everybody. I'm going to go Roll Tide 44-14 on this one.
I think this is a ball game. They'll win. Bama will win this game, but I think it'll be 31-21. I think Texas A&M will score. To me, this is a true first road game for this Bama ball club. I can't consider that Vandy game a road game because the Bama fans travel very well, and that's a game that they knew going in they were going to win. I think this is the true first road test, and I think A&M is able to put some points up on the board, but I think Alabama wins this game.
All right, there you go. That's our predictions. We'll see how we do next Thursday. Don't forget, coming up at the top of the hour, it's the SEC Wizard of Odds show. That's coming up at 9 o'clock Eastern Time right here on SEC Country. And again, thanks to Chris Doering for joining us here tonight. And we'll be back next Thursday, this same time, 7:30, to preview the SEC. For Forrest Conley, I'm Matt Stewart. We'll see you then.